Hi everyone, and welcome to Sarah's Soups episode 3. Today we're going to be making my vegetable saffron soup. This is a vegan soup that's very versatile because you can pretty much put any vegetables you like in it. So let's get to the ingredients and we'll get started. So here I've got all of the ingredients I'm going to use to make the vegetable saffron soup. I've got saffron, olive oil, salt and pepper, oregano. This is cayenne pepper and bay leaves. I'm also using vegetable bouillon because I'm going to make this vegan. If you didn't have vegetable bouillon or are not concerned with it being vegan, you could very well use chicken stock as well. For vegetables, this is what I had in the fridge. So I have about 8 small tomatoes, romas, green onions. I've got 3 peppers, green, bell, and orange. I only have 3 potatoes left, so we're going to pop those in there. The equivalent of about 5 to 6 cloves of garlic, 2 to 3 stalks of celery, the equivalent of 2 large carrots, and 1 large yellow onion. So I'm going to go ahead and start chopping up all the vegetables, and as soon as I have that done, I'll come back and show you what we do next. Okay, so I've got everything chopped up. This is going to be the beginning, our mirepoix, our onions, carrots, and celery. I've got our garlic minced up there, and the bay leaves just happen to be sitting there because they get added at the same time. Over here, I've got all of our peppers, our green onions, and potatoes. I am going to cut these up later when the soup is simmering because the tomatoes go in at the very end. So here, I've got about a half a tablespoon of saffron strands in a half a cup of very hot boiling water. We're going to leave those just to sit and dissolve until we're ready to use them. If you've watched any of my other videos, this is going to look very familiar to you. I'm going to coat the bottom of the pan with about 2 to 3 tablespoons of olive oil and turn it on to medium-high. And we're going to start with the mirepoix here. This is pretty much how I start almost all of my soups, with a few exceptions, but it always helps with rich flavor. You want to make sure you get everything. You definitely want to get in the little bits and leaves from the celery. So to the mirepoix, I added salt and pepper. I use grinders, and as you all know, I'm terrible at measuring. So I used about 12 twists of salt and 12 twists of pepper. We're going to go ahead and saute these for about 5 minutes until the onions start getting translucent. It's been about 5 minutes that I've been sauteing the vegetables, and if you can see, the onions are starting to look a little translucent. So what we're going to do next is add our garlic and our bay leaves. We're just going to put those in there. Then we are going to saute these for another probably about 2 minutes until the garlic starts getting fragrant. After the garlic and bay leaves were added, I sauteed the mirepoix for another couple of minutes. What I did next was added 12 cups of water. And for the vegetable bouillon, I used 5 cubes, and each cube is the equivalent of 2 cups of broth. So I basically put in 12 cups of water and 10 cups worth of cubes. So if you're using a powder, you're going to want to make sure you're doing 10 cups worth. So now that I've got the broth added, I'm going to go ahead and add the rest of my vegetables, which are the green onions, potatoes, and all of the peppers. Remember earlier I said the beauty of this soup is that you could pretty much use any vegetables you want. So anything you have on hand. You could use asparagus, green beans, zucchini, squash, pretty much anything else. So I'm going to go ahead and add these, and then I'll be right back. Now that I've got all the vegetables, I am going to add the rest of the spices in, and we just have a couple left. I'm going to go ahead and dump in the saffron. I want to make sure we get it all in there. Going to do oregano. I'm going to say this is going to end up being about a teaspoonful. Don't worry too much about being precise as usual about the spices, because once it's cooked for a little bit, we are going to taste it and see if we want to add anything. And then last, I've got a little bit of cayenne pepper. You want to go easy on it because it's pretty hot. And if you like it spicier, that's great. Go ahead and add more, but it's better to start with less and add more later. So that's probably about 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon. With everything added, I'm going to turn this up a little bit to high because I want it to boil. And then as soon as it's boiling, I'm going to turn it down to medium low to low, cover it up and simmer it. So our soup is now boiling. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this down. For me, usually ends up being right about 3, which is pretty good. You'll just have to kind of gauge with your stove. I'm going to cover this. We're going to let that simmer for about 30 minutes. And in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and chop up the 8 Roma tomatoes we have. Those we're not going to add till the very end, but it's a perfect time to go ahead and get that ready. So we're also going to check the broth in about 15 minutes. We'll taste it and see if there's any other spices that we want to add. So until then, hang tight and I'll be back soon. At this point, our soup has been simmering for 15 minutes. It's a little steamy there. I'm going to go ahead and take some of the broth out so we can test it and see how it's doing. So if you've seen my previous videos, you know I like to use a little shot glass. Just going to let it put a couple spoonfuls in here and let it cool off. And then we're going to taste it and see if we want to add any more spices. Since we're at the 15-minute point too, by the way, I'm going to go ahead and add the tomatoes. I diced these up while that was simmering. It was about 8 Roma tomatoes worth. I made sure, if you can see there's definitely some juice in the bottom there. So I made sure when I was chopping them up that I got everything, seeds, everything, juices, all that good stuff. So go ahead and add these in. Give her a little stir. You might have to turn it up for a minute to get it back to simmering because that might have cooled it down. So while I'm tasting the broth, I'm going to turn this up to medium high again just to get her boiling again. It shouldn't take very long, just a few minutes. And then I'm going to taste this and see if we need to add anything. So I tasted the broth. It's still not back up to boiling here, just to note, but I tasted the broth. The heat was actually pretty decent, so I'm not going to add any more cayenne. But I am going to add probably another 1/2 teaspoon of oregano and some salt. And what I did notice and forgot to mention earlier is that my vegetable bouillon was low sodium. So that's probably why I feel the need to add more salt. So I'm going to go ahead and add just probably 3 or 4 more twists of salt. And like I said, another 1/2 teaspoon of oregano. And the tomatoes are in there. We added those just a few minutes ago. And as soon as this is boiling again, I'm going to turn it back down to medium low to low. And we're going to let it simmer for another 15 minutes covered. Okay, so after adding those extra spices, I let it simmer for another 10 minutes because I wanted to taste it again before we finish up, just to see how it's going. So I'm going to grab another couple scoops out of here. I'm going to stir it up a little bit here first. It looks delicious. Okay, so I'm going to let that cool off. We really only need this to simmer another 5-10 minutes. Probably 5 unless I add some more spices, and then we'll simmer it for another 10. So I'm going to let that cool off, taste it, and we'll be right back. Okay, so I tasted it and it tastes pretty darn good. So I'm just going to leave it as is. We are going to simmer it for another 5 to 10 minutes covered. And then we'll come back and finish up. So the soup has now been simmering for a total of 30 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it off. We are done You do want to make sure and remove both of your bay leaves before you serve anything up. Not that it'll hurt anybody, but you definitely don't need those in there for serving. So I gotta find one more. And then I'm gonna pour a bowl and we'll close this one out. Okay, so I removed the bay leaves and we are ready to finish up. But before we close out and I show you our finished product, I wanted to mention a few things. Earlier I mentioned that the vegetable saffron soup was super versatile. You could pretty much use any vegetables you want. If, like I mentioned earlier, if you wanted to add asparagus, green beans, maybe some zucchini. What I would recommend though is keeping the same ratio of vegetables that we use, because it's a pretty good consistency the way I make it and with those amounts that we use today. The other thing you could also add is maybe beans, some quinoa, if you wanted a little more substance instead of just vegetables. But I like mine with just vegetables because I'm going easy on carbs, so I leave all that stuff out. And I poured a bowl, and if you can see here, it looks really good. You're ready to rock. Again, thanks everyone for watching Sarah's Soups episode 3, Vegetable Saffron, and we'll see you next time.